So UFC 316 just took place, and I did just do a fight companion for the entire card, so my voice is a little bit kind of broken at this point, but I did want to recap the whole card, and I'm mostly going to talk about the top 3 fights, because in my opinion, they all delivered in different ways. In the main event, Ilia Topuria knocked out our boy Charles do Bronx Oliveira in the first round, and I will be honest, I'm actually not really as sad about it as I thought I was going to be. To be honest, I really thought that I'd be sad like I did when Makhachev beat Oliveira, but I feel like maybe it's just because I expected this to happen. I did pick Ilia Topuria to win by KO. I did pick Ilia Topuria to win by KO with a lot of confidence. I just thought it was going to happen in round 2 or round 3. But Topuria, he sleeps olives, and the first thing I want to say before I do kind of give a bit more of a breakdown is, who does Topuria lose to at 155 pounds? Because I do genuinely still believe that stylistically Oliveira does still present like a pretty tough sort of test for Topuria, given the size, given the wrestling, given the grappling. And aside from Arman Tsarukyan, who was going to test Topuria in that sort of aspect? Because I don't think Gaethje can. And I think if you did Topuria versus Gaethje, I think Topuria also knocks out Justin Gaethje, probably in the first 2 rounds. I think if you did Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett, which is not what I expected them to be talking about, I think that Topuria knocks out Paddy Pimblett. And I know that Scousers don't get knocked out. I think Topuria has the power to do it. And I also think that if you did Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan, I think now we can probably safely say that Arman Tsarukyan is going to be the toughest stylistic test for Ilia Topuria. I still think that it would end up in a Topuria knockout, man. Like, who does Ilia Topuria lose to? I feel like maybe he's just too good right now. I do kind of wish that he did still stay at 145 pounds, because I think a win over Movsar Evloev would look ridiculous on his resume. But now that he's at 155 and he just beat Charles do Bronx, a guy that is significantly larger than him, a guy that is significantly taller than him. You know, Oliveira even tried to do the game plan, which I thought was going to be the way that you have to beat Ilia, which is use that size advantage which you've got, bully him in the clinch, which Oliveira couldn't successfully do, and then try and get top control against them. And once again, Topuria reversed the position, so Oliveira obviously couldn't get the top control. And then, of course, when the fight got back up to the feet, Topuria knocked out Charles Oliveira. Now, as what is for next for Topuria, I don't really know, to be honest, because I feel like you could do multiple different things. I would personally like to see the UFC just get Topuria back in there in October against Justin Gaethje, and just get that fight done. Gaethje's claiming he's going to retire if he doesn't get the fight. Just give him his wish. Gaethje versus Topuria. As soon as it is humanly possible to do so, let's build up Ilia Topuria while he is now in his prime. And then I think you could do Topuria versus Pimblett at a later date. If Pimblett beat someone like Dan Hooker, I think would be kind of like a guy, if Paddy Pimblett beat, you could justify a title shot. Unless you're desperate to make that fight happen and you really want to do Topuria versus Pimblett, I say, why not? Like, just do it. Like, seriously, why not? Just do Topuria versus Pimblett. I mean, it doesn't really matter. He's going to beat them all, right? Maybe except for Arman. Arman's like the only guy I think that Topuria could struggle against. But I think that it was a performance that really kind of showed off how good he is. And now talking about performances that show off how good someone is. Alejandro Pantoja really dominated Kai Kara France everywhere, to be honest. Kai Kara France, as much as I do love him, just didn't really have any moments, you know what I mean? Pantoja got the takedown early against Kai Kara France, got the back very early in the first minute of the fight, and kind of dominated the first round with his grappling. I will be honest, halfway through the first round, when Pantoja had that arm triangle choke in, I thought it was done. I cannot believe that Kai Kara France escaped that arm triangle position. That is probably the most locked in arm triangle choke that hasn't finished a fight I think I've ever seen, I'll be honest. So Kai Kara France did very well to escape the submission attempts early. And then in round 2, I think this is where the fight got pretty interesting, because Pantoja all of a sudden was starting to struggle to get the takedown. On the feet, Pantoja, though, was still pressuring forward and finding a lot of success with that pressure. And Kai Kara France just couldn't really deal with it, I'll be honest. And although Pantoja found a lot of success on the feet in round 2, I also think that this is a kind of a point in the fight where maybe in a different world that this is kind of the turning point, because it looked like Pantoja was starting to breathe a little bit heavy. The strikes were getting a little bit more labored, but Kai Kara France never really capitalized. And honestly, just as I said, the pressure of Pantoja, man. Like, just the way that this guy is always he doesn't like pressure forward like most guys do. Like, he doesn't pressure forward like Brandon Royval was against Joshua Van. He just storms forward. Like, he makes you back up. Like, you can't do anything but back up when Pantoja is coming forward and throwing down. And maybe Joshua Van could be the guy to counter that style. We'll talk about that in a moment, of course. But I think that Pantoja, like, just the way that he fights, the pressure that he brings, who beats him on the feet? Who beats Pantoja, man? Like, it's just unreal how good he looked in this matchup. And I know Kai Kara-France is a pure striker. He's very one-dimensional in that area. But very good performance for Kai Kara-France. Oh, no, for Pantoja, sorry. Just kind of shut down Kai Kara-France. And I would say it was a pretty bad performance for Kai Kara-France, but at the same time, he kind of did everything he does in every other fight. You know what I mean? Except for, I think, one big mistake he was making was he was ducking so much in that matchup. And if Pantoja had, like, better instincts and could have thrown a knee or an uppercut in moments, I think he probably could have knocked him out, just given the fact that he was ducking so much. But another thing as well that's really sad, you know, you guys know that I'm moldy, right? So when I see all of the racism online, it's kind of made me have to unfollow a lot of MMA pages because it's just kind of like, it's just like messed up. It's so unnecessary. You know what I mean? So a lot of MMA pages got an unfollow from the great Artem MMA today. But Pantoja looked incredible. I'm going to leave him on the screen for a second because I want to talk about Josh Van. Because I think that Josh Van versus Pantoja is going to be next. And I absolutely love this fight. I did say in my breakdown, actually, that I am picking Brandon Royval because I did pick Brandon Royval to win the fight. But I would like to see Van win because Van versus Pantoja is a lot more of an interesting fight to me than Royval versus Pantoja 3, right? I mean, Pantoja's beaten Royval twice, and he's done it recently. We don't really need to see a third fight between the two. I think Pantoja would beat Royval relatively easily. Now, Van, in this matchup against Royval, I think the first run was close, but I think Van just had more moments. I think he did more damage. And then the round 2, and this is where it gets kind of crazy with the scorecard. Someone scored this 30-27. I think Royval won every single minute of the second round. And I mean that when I say that. I genuinely think that Royval started hot and he ended hot. I don't really think Van had any moments in the second round to not really speak of. And I think I need to say that this fight was fucking insane. Like, the volume that was put on, I think Royval landed like 160 significant strikes in 3 rounds. That is ridiculous volume. Like, just unbelievable. And I'll talk about a bit more of a breakdown later. But I wanted to talk about this because I personally thought that Royval was on his way to winning that third round. And in the last 10 seconds, Van got a big knockdown that I think stole him the fight. I think it stole the round, and I think it stole him the fight. And in turn, has now gifted us Van versus Pantoja, which I'm so excited about. I think it's a better fight than Royval versus Pantoja 3. Let's talk about the fight now. Banger. Absolute banger. Royval starts the fight, doing his jabs, just throwing jabs all the time. Non-stop jabs. And Van eventually starts to time them. It did take a couple of minutes, I would say, for Van to realize that he needed to, you know, not needed to, just the way that he can counter Royval. And once he did, he started to land the better shots. Royval outlanded him on the numbers, but I think that Van landed the better strikes in round 2. And then in round 2, I think Royval landed more and landed the better strikes, which is why I'm shocked that a judge gave Van round 2. Genuinely unsure. And then round 3 was close again, but once again, Royval was having some huge moments in this round, landing big combinations. So was Van, but Royval was winning round 3 on my scorecard until the knockdown, and Van, with his plot armor, has managed to get the win over Royval, which is nuts because you need to talk about this. He took this fight on weeks' notice. He fought the day before he accepted this matchup. Absolutely insane win for Van. One thing that I am actually quite salty about, I'll be honest, is I feel like we sacrificed Tatsuro Taira now for no reason. But it is what it is. I mean, just sucks. It kind of sucks. I would rather have seen undefeated Tatsuro Taira fight for the belt than a Tatsuro Taira with a loss. But this fight now, Van versus Pantoja, is a sick fight. Now, I will give you guys my early prediction, my early belief. I do think Pantoja does beat Van, because the thing about Pantoja is he is going to shoot for takedowns on Van. And another thing as well is when Van was moving backwards, he wasn't landing as effectively on Royval as when he was dictating the pace moving forwards. I know a lot of people saw the Van performance against Royval and just instantly want to pick him to beat Pantoja. They're completely different fights, man. Like, Royval didn't even attempt a single takedown, which I thought was a very, very odd move, personally. I just strongly disagree with that game plan. I picked Royval based on... I said in my breakdown that Royval was going to lose the striking, but win on the grappling, right? And that's how I think Pantoja versus Van goes. I think Pantoja goes out there against Van, and I think that Van does beat Pantoja on the feet, but I think that Pantoja will get takedowns on Van. And I know that Van's takedown defense has held up so well in the past. But I think that, you know, when you take on an elite guy like Pantoja, who was just able to topple over Kai Kara-France with his pressure, because that's how I think he got a lot of his takedowns, was he was pressuring forward, storming forward, and because Kai Kara-France was moving backwards so quickly, it made Pantoja be able to take him down so easily. And I do think that we could see that happen to Van, because Van is a very small guy for 125. He looked small in there against Royval. I also think that another thing too is that Pantoja will kind of give himself opportunities on the feet too with the takedown attempts. But another thing as well that I want to note is I said this in the breakdown of the Kai Kara-France fight. Round 2 looked like it was going to be the turning point for Kai Kara-France to maybe make a comeback in the matchup, right? Pantoja, his cardio, I don't know what it is about his cardio. Like, does he just like kind of get tired and then just spam takedowns? I don't really know what his game plans really are. But I feel like the thing is, I feel like Van might have the better cardio of the two. I can tell you Van probably doesn't cut much weight really at all to make 125. He just fought a very, very high-paced fight against Royval, and he didn't look like he was gassed out beyond belief like the fat heavyweights in the first fight were, and the first fight of the night were, right? I think Van, like, honestly, could have a performance where if he can survive the first 2, maybe 3 rounds against Pantoja, and you take this to the championship rounds. I know Van's never been to the championship rounds, but still, if you can take it there, Van could take over and knock out Pantoja late. I know no one's ever knocked out Pantoja before, but Pantoja really, really death-gassed and a fresh-ish Van. I think it's going to make for an exciting fight. I want to see that fight in November or December. Absolutely would love that matchup. Darush versus Moicano. Not that fun. I will be honest. It wasn't that fun. Round 1 was fun though. Moicano got a knockdown towards the end of the round, landed a big straight right on Benny Darush and put him down relatively badly. But after that, Darush kind of smartened up a bit and got a pretty solid game plan going with the wrestling. And I think that the wrestling is kind of the key for beating Moicano, I guess, you know, because he was able to control Moicano with not really that much issue. Moicano's takedown defense was bad, just to put it bluntly. Like, it just kind of was. Like, whenever Darush actually attempted a takedown, he got it. Moicano did scramble well in moments, but the thing is about Darush is we've seen Darush fight and beat Gamrot before, so that kind of was a good sort of way for Darush to be able to beat Moicano was the scrambles. Another fight that I did get incorrectly was Talbot versus Lima. 2 things. First thing is Talbot greatly improved. Second thing is Felipe Lima, where was your fight IQ, man? Lima was beating Talbot on the feet in the first round. I thought he was having his moments anyway. And then he started shooting the takedowns, and when he started shooting the takedowns, that's when he lost the fight. And apparently he told his corner that Talbot hits so hard he doesn't want to stand with him, which I guess makes sense. But the thing is, you were winning the striking. You were winning the striking, and you gave it up for the takedowns. But the thing is, Talbot's takedown defense against Barcelos, you know, was able to dominate Talbot. But Barcelos is a national wrestling champion in Brazil, right? So it's like, you know, and Felipe Lima is a lot smaller than Talbot and Barcelos, but still, Talbot's takedown defense really held up. Even though he did get taken down in a couple of moments, he got up quickly, he scrambled well, was able to take top control well, and even in moments too in the second and the third round, when Talbot had the top control, was landing ground and pound against Lima and looking pretty good. I thought that Talbot, you know, I feel like Talbot could have done some work on top, and he just gave up the position to stand, which was good fight IQ, I feel like, even though I feel like Talbot could have actually safely controlled Lima in those moments. It was a close fight, but I think Talbot very, very clearly won it, especially with the big third round. I had it 1-1 going into the third, but honestly, you could maybe even argue that Talbot won the first round. Maybe. So you could have even had it 2-0 Talbot going into the third. But, I mean, it was 1-1 going into the third. And I do think that was the right scorecard, 29-28 Talbot. Rodriguez waxed Hermanson. He was losing until he wasn't. Hermanson was kind of doing his thing. The first thing I want to say is Joe Pyfer's power severely overrated? Because it might be. Pyfer was landing some clean shots on Hermanson in the first and second round of their matchup and couldn't knock him out. Rodriguez lands one good shot of Hermanson and puts out one of the most brutal knockouts that we've seen in a long time. And then followed up with a relatively sketchy hammer fist, which, you know, probably could have been controlled and held back. But we know that Rodriguez is a dirty fighter. Just watch him versus Dennis Yululin. So that's the thing. Rodriguez brutally knocks out Hermanson. I think he's going to take a Boost Magomedov spot in the rankings at number 15. And maybe we can see Rodriguez get a bit of a move up in the rankings. Delgado waxes Hyder Emil in the first 30 seconds. This is the third fight I got wrong on the card and the final fight I got wrong on the card. I picked an underdog. It did not work. Emil went out there, kind of did his thing a little bit. The fight only lasted 26 seconds, so what can you say? Delgado got Emil in a clinch. Kneed him, knocked him out. Massive performance for Delgado. That's a big win. It's still kind of hard to tell how good Delgado truly is. But this is a massive, massive win to have in your record. Emil was 3-0, maybe 4-0 in the UFC, 3-0 in the UFC. Great Contender Series win Emil had. Just kind of huge, huge victory for Delgado here. Very, very excited to see where he can go next because he could be a prospect to really keep your eye on. Cortez versus Araujo. I will be honest with you guys, I was playing Clash of Clans as this fight was on. Wasn't really that keen on it. Was pretty boring. Cortez won it though, I thought, from what I saw. McKenna versus Bochev. I gave a breakdown saying that I wasn't that confident in this fight because I wasn't. But if McKenna was to win, he's going to need to get the wrestling going. And I actually picked McKenna by submission. And he got the submission in 55 seconds. Very good game plan for McKenna. You know, there was a world out there where McKenna just stands and strikes with Bochev and gets knocked out in the first round. But he didn't. I think he's recognized now the chin is dust. He cannot stand with anybody. So it is time to wrestle. And I love the game plan for McKenna here. I love the fact that he shot takedowns. I feel like if he had shot takedowns in previous matchups, he probably wouldn't be walking CTE right now. So I do love the fact that he did this in this fight. And it paid off. Bochev, in the past, has shown absolutely no grappling ability whatsoever. Bochev, in the past, has shown the fact that he cannot defend a takedown to save his life. And McKenna exposed that. McKenna's a good wrestler. He just never really used it. Perfect opportunity for him. Jacoby Smith fought against Nico Price. Nico Price has kids. I really hope they didn't see this fight. Jacoby Smith, borderline 10-8 round in round number 1. Round number 2 happened. Smith is clearly gassed out a little bit, which I was a little bit worried about. I was. But still got a takedown, still got control, and ended up snatching up a very clean rear naked choke at the end of the second round. As much as I did say that Smith was going to kill Price in the first round, and I do feel like Smith would have done that if he didn't just control Price, in the first round. If Smith didn't jump on that takedown, and Smith just stood with Nico Price, he was dusting Price earlier. I actually think he would have absolutely smoked him on the feet, but he didn't, and I honestly think this is probably good experience for Smith, going deep into the second round against a veteran. I don't really know how I feel about it though, because the thing is about Smith is he's been rumored to go to 155 for a while now. But I know that a lot of people would say maybe it wasn't a cardio issue, it was more of a he just did so much work in the first round issue. But I feel like if he's going to cut to 155, that's going to hurt the cardio, right? So yeah, I feel like I'm a little bit worried about Smith if he goes to 155. But I think as long as he's at 170 and he kind of keeps sort of fighting guys that I believe he's going to have a good striking advantage against. I know he's a wrestler, but still, I think he's going to be fine. I like Smith as a prospect a lot. He's very, very good. One of the best to come out of the Contender Series last year. And this fight was good. This fight was more competitive than I thought it was going to be. I did pick Denise to absolutely wax Alvin Hines, and it looked like he was going to do that. You know, Hines was wearing a lot of damage on his face. Seems like a really nice guy, though. Apparently, he was up trying to help Christopher Hewitt cut weight at 2 a.m. before the weigh-ins. So, kind of seems like a pretty solid guy to kind of have around, I guess. But Here's another thing about Hines, though, is he really did give Denise a tough fight here. You know, the first round wasn't really competitive. Denise did just kind of smoke him, defended his takedowns well. Same sort of thing in round 2, actually. But Denise started to death gas, man. I think that high cholesterol is really hurting his heart, so he couldn't really breathe that well in the second round. So he started to gas out. Round 3 happened, and Hines, on short notice, was the fresher fighter. And Hines just had a good high volume third round. Now, it didn't really look like Hines was ever going to finish Denise, and Hines' takedowns were getting stuffed really easily. So maybe in the future, Hines should work on his takedown entries just to kind of set them up a little bit better. But I think that it was a good performance for both guys. I think Hines' stock does go up. I feel like people that were picking Hines probably are very upset about this because he didn't shoot as much takedowns as I expected him to, and I think a lot of people did. Like, if you're picking Hines, you're picking Hines to wrestle, and he didn't. And I feel like also, if you're picking Denise, you're picking to win by KO, and he didn't. So maybe a little bit of a disappointing fight from both guys, but, you know, the thing about Denise is I think maybe he's just not as good as I thought he was. I think Denise, he's just slow. He's just a slow, fat heavyweight. I don't really know what else to say about him. But anyway, that is the breakdown for the card. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.